Hello and good evening, and thanks for joining us again for another edition of Ideas Exchange. This is the first for the year 2022. Today is January 12th, so 12 days already gone into the year, and our choice for the discussion today is going to focus on the human resource capital, which is key to every country's development. And by so, we are referring to our educational sector. A lot of people are confused. Some say we have a crisis that must be managed with immediate effect. Others are suggesting that the reforms that have been proposed may solve our problems. But the facts are these, that as we speak, public sector basic schools are home, and there is no idea about when they are coming back. Again, those who have gone back to school, I'm referring to those in SHS, are most likely to go back home after 3 weeks, because we understand that they are back in school just to write their exams, come back home, and then the new academic calendar that is being considered may take off in March. We are not too sure of the policy government may want to implement this year. Again, as we speak, university lecturers are on strike. We also know that heads of basic and secondary schools are not speaking too openly about what they may consider inappropriate for teaching and learning in schools. And teacher unions are also losing their credibility because some members are suspicious their leadership have been compromised. And parents, you and I, as stakeholders, are not too sure about what is happening in this country. Today, we want to speak to one key stakeholder in the education sector. We want to find out what is going on. If we are talking about reforms today, have you brought all the stakeholders on the block to have frank discussions? And are we considering policies that will be embraced by all and not by a government of the day, which may be thrown out tomorrow, which will be so much cost to us? Today, our guest is from Africa Education Watch. He has a lot of experience in the sector, and I'll share with you a little about his profile. But first, let me introduce him to the show. Good evening, and thank you for joining us, Kofi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And how has it been? After the Xmas, we are starting slowly, but you seem to have already started running, because I've seen a statement you just issued about your summary of the assessment you've made so far on the education sector, and you've made some recommendations.
Yeah, at EduWatch, we were virtually not on Xmas break because we had lots of activities planned between December and January, and so we are not in transition at all. We have been working since December 24 on various projects, and we had strict timelines to meet. So the statement you are referring to, yes, indeed, it's actually the outcome of our end-of-year deliberation with stakeholders.
We'll be going into that because our topic this night on Ideas Exchange is what we have put together as education sector crisis, self-inflicted or a political mess. And I told you my guest tonight has a lot of experience in this sector and the subject for today. He has 17 years of experience or more in the education sector of Ghana, working with schools, communities, international organizations, and government agencies. And what is key to the experience he has is the expertise in designing, managing, and reviewing projects. He's chaired the Ghana National Education Coalition campaign, represented civil society on the Ministerial Advisory Board at the Ministry of Education and Education Sector Working and Technical Committees. He's played key roles in the development of previous Education Strategic Plan, ESP 2010 to 2020. And then, of course, he's also working on the current one with other stakeholders, ESP 2018-2030, served as a rapporteur for the Ministry of Education for 6 years, developed manuals for the Ghana Education Service, consulted for international organizations, and I'll share a few with you. These include USAID, ILO, teacher unions, WUSC, Comfort, World Bank, and so on and so forth. Kofi Asare tonight will be having frank discussions with us on what he has observed so far. Kofi, your package, which you put out 2 days ago, was looking at the structure of our educational sector from the basic to the tertiary. You looked at policies that are in place, i.e. curriculum, recruitment into the sector, teacher availability, policy that is either skewed or not targeted at real problems, and of course, made recommendations that should be considered by government, especially with specific reference to some of the reforms government is considering. What key concerns are dear to you?
Well, as a stakeholder in the education space, definitely there are always going to be concerns. Why are there going to be concerns? Because education is the biggest sector in the country. It commands close to a quarter of the nation's expenditure. And it is the heartbeat of the nation because almost every citizen has a relative, a child going through education or skills training. So it is the aspect of the economy that affects everyone. And it lies at the core of our human development as a nation. And so it shouldn't be surprising that within this sector, you always have issues to deal with. And there's a direct correlation between education and health because an educated person is much more likely to observe healthier lifestyles, to afford healthier lifestyles because they will most likely earn more income, etc. There's a correlation between education and mortality, education and nutrition, education and income, socioeconomic status, and all the SDGs, so far as I'm concerned, impinge on educational outcomes. And so education is critical, and that is why there will definitely be issues. Whenever we discuss these issues, it is not as though something extraordinary has happened, but it is actually as a result of the need to draw attention to them and accord them the necessary attention so that our system continuously improves, in serving the educational needs of our citizenry. In our release, as I mentioned, we raise issues relating to one, spending efficiency. And let me put it this way. Africa has a challenge with spending efficiency, especially in the education sector. According to the African Development Bank in their 2020 outlook of the economies of Africa, it identified that even though Africa was the second highest continent in terms of allocation of GDP to education, when it came to spending efficiency, how that allocation was spent, Africa was the last continent. Not only was Africa last, but Africa, the distance between, or the difference between Africa being last and the last but one continent, South America, was about 20 percentage points. It tells you the story of spending inefficiency in education financing in Africa. And the sector we operate in is the largest. Because it is the largest, it requires lots of resources. And because it requires lots of resources in a lower middle income country where scarcity is a challenge, it's an issue. One of the key strategies you adopt to mitigate the issue of resource scarcity and ensure there's an equitable deployment of scarce resources is to be spending efficient. If you look at the statement we release, we raise issues relating to the concentration of single source procurement or the focus of single source procurement in the education sector. It is an issue that worries because we believe that His Excellency the President raised issues with single source procurement years ago, and he promised that if given the opportunity to come and steer the affairs of this country, he was going to depart from the use of single source procurement as a culture and make it an exception, which was very heartwarming. Unfortunately, we have a system in the education sector where major procurements are all single sourced. I don't need to remind anyone about why His Excellency promised to depart from us, because we all agree that it doesn't give you the best assurance of value for money or spending efficiency. And that competitive procurement gives you the opportunity to select and choose from the best, quotes. And so we have raised issue that in the face of dwindling resources, especially within COVID, where countries are struggling to raise the needed revenue to build pandemic education systems, pandemic resilient education systems, where in this year, the sector's allocation of the national budget was 12.9%, less than 16% or 15%, as experienced in previous years. It means that you must begin to be spending efficient and take a critical look about how you allocate and spend money.
Just recently, the president had opportunity to address the Ghana National Association of Teachers. And the president proudly said that under his regime, his government is making the highest in terms of allocations to the sector. And then we are at the same time raising concerns about spending efficiency. Does it mean that it is not reflecting in the number of schools we expect, the number of infrastructure that may need to bridge any gap, and then, of course, other related programs that government may want to put out there to support the system?
Spending efficiency is not about allocation of resources. What His Excellency said is correct. Investment in education in the past 5 years have been unprecedented, high levels of investment. So what His Excellency said is correct. But what we are talking about is spending efficiency. It is the efficiency with which you use allocated funds, to the extent that it assures much more value for money than, it assures much more value for money. Spending efficiency is where, for example, if you want to buy past questions, you don't do single source procurement, but you rather undertake competitive procurement activities such that you are able to get a much more, negotiated, a good deal in terms of the money you have. Spending efficiency is where, if you want to procure laptops for teachers, you don't just go to one company and tell the company that I want you to supply laptops to about 280,000 teachers, but rather you undertake competitive procurement activities with the aim of trying to get the best deal in terms of value for money.
Government has the option to provide as much infrastructure as possible, and then government is spending a chunk under the free SHS program in the name of payments for access and feeding. And that is perhaps what is raising the budgetary allocation, which the government is giving itself thumbs up for.
I think what you are mentioning has more to do with allocative efficiency than spending efficiency. If I have 10 Ghana cedis and I can manage within that 10 Ghana cedis and get lunch and water to buy in East Legon, and you have 10 Ghana cedis, but you can't get lunch and water, you can only get the same lunch in East Legon, then I am undertaking a spending efficient activity, because with the same amount of money, I am able to get more at the same quality. So that is spending efficiency. Allocative efficiency is how you allocate resources, if you like, amongst service delivery, amongst consumption and then expenditure. But within the education sector, we must always understand that a mix of consumption and investment is critical to achieving learning outcomes. Yes, one government may prioritize investment in infrastructure and facilities and equipment. Another government may prioritize investment in consumption and personal emolument and capacity building. It is the blend of these two approaches that produces quality allocative efficiency. And so if government is spending money, for instance, to provide food for people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to enter free senior and secondary education or secondary schools, if government is spending money to provide free admission fees, uniforms and other facilities and resources that people who originally wouldn't have been able to afford same at the secondary level, and for that matter they are now in secondary schools, and that is leading to an increase in enrollment from about 900,000 to 1.2 million. It may be, or it is, a consumption expenditure, but so far as education economists like myself are concerned, even though it is a consumption expenditure, it is aimed at human capital development, and for that matter, it is a social investment. That is, however, different from government spending 240 million Ghana cedis, using the money to buy food for teacher trainees who are students in tertiary institutions, where other tertiary students are actually qualifying or assessing student loan, which government is now making it guarantor-free. That is a waste. So there's a difference between the various types of expenditure, whether they are in consumption or they are in investment. It depends on the rationale.
Now, in your presentation, and I want us to stay there a little, and then we go back to other issues you raised, because you spoke about government spending 240 million plus on allowances for teacher trainees, when we have a shortfall of about 44,000 teachers needed for our basic schools. Yet you are suggesting in that presentation that the 240 million, for example, could take care of 6,000 teachers needed for our rural schools. But government has also made an argument that, and just as you put it under the umbrella of free SHS, as many people who may be in tertiary institutions for the training of teachers, for example, may not have been there if the Alawa program had not been restored. Is it not the same thing we are looking at? Why would that be unnecessary?
I agree with government that the allowance is a useful policy. But I agree with government to the extent that it was a useful policy perhaps in the early 90s and in the 80s, and not today. I started campaigning against the cancellation of the teacher training allowance as far back as 2006. I remember participating in meetings with Honorable Ban Redu, 2005 to 2006, started talking about cancellation of the allowance. So the campaign to cancel the allowance was a long-standing campaign, and we were happy that at a point we were compelled to cancel it because we had acceded to IMF. But we were happy that we have achieved our aim. Our aim was to get it cancelled. Why did we want the allowance cancelled? We wanted allowance cancelled because in the first place, there was an increasing demand for teacher training. So why the need to incentivize it? Second, two Ghanaians set out to go and train in the university. One undertakes marketing. One subscribes to a marketing program, and the other does teaching, B.Ed, teacher education, or B.Ed, basic education. Now, the one who is doing marketing has no assurance of a job. They are going to complete school and go and struggle within the private sector. Whether they will get a job or not, we don't know. And they can be there for 10 years without finding one. The other one who is doing education has the assurance of a job, because that person is actually undertaking that program in a college of education, and that person is bonded. Bonded means government is committed to giving you a placement when you complete school. Which of these two is vulnerable in terms of the certainty of finding jobs? Obviously, it is the one who is doing the marketing, because they don't know where their next job will come from. Now, which of these two do you have to incentivize? Because the fact that bonding teachers guarantees them a ready job is the biggest incentive. It's the biggest incentive. So all we're saying then was that, look, the sector we are dealing with has a lot of problems, especially problems relating to inequitable deployment of resources. You don't have adequate schools. As we sit here, there are about 10,000 schools needed in Ghana. 25% of our primary schools do not have junior high schools. So students complete primary school and walk out of school and drop out of school. They become dropouts because they have to commute for miles to the next community. So we need 4,000 junior high schools. At the same time, there are 5,400 schools that are existing, but they exist under trees and shades. If you have such a challenge, and prior to 2010, 2012, we had schools under trees. So that argument was then made that if you have the situation, why would you spend so much on teacher trainees when the schools that they will be expecting to be placed to go and teach
are either not available
or are in a deplorable state such that labor will not be comfortable or motivated working in that environment?
Well, that argument may continue for a while, because as long as this government is in power, it may appear very difficult for government to swallow its own words by going back to...
I know it is difficult,
withdraw
but it is not impossible. And the challenges the economy is going through in terms of revenue generation, post-COVID economic recovery issues, austerity issues, are all opportunities for us to take hard decisions. Ghanaians normally don't prefer having hard discussions or having difficult discussions. It's time for us to have difficult discussions. And I think that this is an opportunity for the Ministry of Education to take a bold, step.
We know one key issue that has always been on the table is education reforms. For the past 2 years, there have been conversations about non-availability of textbooks or a better curricula which will address the challenges of today, looking at industry and what job opportunities may be available for those we are churning out. In your presentation, you highlighted them under different bullet points. One was challenges with standard-based curriculum implementation, proposals for secondary education reforms, unstable academic calendar, and GES governance issues, spending inefficiency, which we've dealt with. Of course, we'll spend time on WAEC and get fund issues. Every education sector depends on three things: the availability of the infrastructure, the curriculum which the students will ride on, and then results-oriented programming that will ensure quality education. Now, as it is now, many people are concerned that the sector as we know today appears to be sinking. Government is proposing reforms. Has there been enough consultation that guarantees acceptability?
I think that before I come to the key issue, let me indicate that the perception that education standards, education sector is sinking is a perception that is always there. In Ghana, there is no time that someone said that, oh, education is improving, we are happy. It's always a perception that education standards are reducing. Perhaps it is born out of the concern by the citizenry that things must always improve. The fact that things must always improve does not necessarily mean that education is retrograde.
If most Ghanaian parents are not too sure, cannot understand the academic calendars we are running for schools, from basic to tertiary, if today, as we speak, the universities would say that they are behind the normal schedules, and even the online training programs they are running does not come with that quality expected, most especially to the disadvantage of the rural folk, the rural tertiary students who don't have access to the luxury of internet, for example, to efficiently participate in the online training programs. It is not an improvement of what happened yesterday, and therefore anybody would say it is an issue of concern today that
I agree with you from an
bad.
angle. I agree with you from an angle. That is from an operational angle. There will definitely be operational issues. So far as I'm concerned, there are always operational issues. Look, the biggest challenge in third world Africa is the policy, praxis. The difference between policy and implementation. How policies manifest at the school level and how they differ. That is the challenge. So once you have a policy praxis situation, definitely it means that the intervening factor is an operational deficit. So there are operational gaps. But it doesn't necessarily mean that standards are falling. I'm saying so because we measure educational outcomes in Ghana through two main means. The first is our C results and then the BC results. Those are not final outcomes, but at least intermediate outcomes. And you bear testimony to the fact that we haven't seen a drastic reduction or a trendy reduction in the quality of performance, in these two results. Not at the national level per se, but even in the rural areas. We are still seeing, the same trends that we've observed in the past 10, 15 years. And so there's nothing drastic happening to suggest that education standards are increasing, are falling. That is the point I want to make. But there are issues relating to operations. the difficulty in maintaining a stable timetable. I was telling a colleague that until 3 years ago, I never knew that the 2 decades of experience working in the sector and seeing a stable academic calendar was an achievement. I took it for granted that having a predictable academic calendar was an achievement. But I now know that, it was an achievement because it is not that easy to maintain a stable academic calendar. Perhaps because there was no COVID, and perhaps because there was no double track. But again, I will admit that double track and COVID are the two key players when it comes to the disruptions in academic calendar, especially double track. But again, I say that we can no more use double track as an excuse because we've done over 3 academic years of double track. It has become a subculture. So it can no more be used as an excuse for having, an ever-changing academic calendar where even on the day students are supposed to resume to school, you have the calendar changing. So I think that there's an element of negligence, there's an element of dereliction of duty on the part of public officers whose duty it is to manage an academic calendar. And I have raised it to the Ministry of Education that until we have a system where persons at the GES whose job it is to maintain an academic calendar are punished for some of this negligent behavior, we are going to have a challenge, having a predictable academic calendar. But I'm happy that the ministry indicated to us last year that it was constituting a committee to take over that particular function, obviously because the GES had failed in managing the calendar to the expectation of all of us.
Kofi Asare is the Executive Director of Africa Education Watch, and this evening we are looking at the education sector. Ghanaians have raised a series of concerns. Government is giving us assurances that they are introducing reforms which are starting from this year. In fact, I'll share a post with you as we take a break. And this one was a quotation by the Education Ministry PRO, Kwesi Kwarteng. I'll read as we share it on the screen. It says, it's an undeniable fact that the whole COVID regime certainly distorted our academic calendar. But of course, what the Ministry of Education has done is to now set the clarity so that the inconsistencies and, of course, the discrepancies when it comes to our academic calendar that we have been witnessing will be a thing of the past. And so what the Minister of Education, the Honorable Dr. Osei Yao Educhum, has done is to set up a ministerial committee, as Africa Education Watch has just said, on a school calendar. The committee had met, and of course, under the leadership of the Deputy Minister, Reverend Intim Fojo, just last Thursday, they finalized the draft document of their work. Now, the question, as you take the break, as you reflect on this conversation is, hasn't it taken too long that even when schools are reopening, government is going to look at the draft to set the pace for the way forward? When we come back, we'll continue our conversation after this short break.
The average human body mass should have at least 60% water for optimal performance in any physical or mental exercise. We can help you maintain it naturally. X Natural Mineral Water. Simply natural. Welcome to the Royal Dazzle Event Center. With a lush and well-maintained lawn and garden, you are assured of the best serene and comfortable atmosphere to organize all your family and social events. Live the royal moments here with friends and family. The hosting capacity of 600 to 800 people makes Royal Dazzle the most versatile of places to host weddings, parties, funerals, conferences, concerts, and many more. Create your memories with us. Call us for inquiries on 055-814-8585 or 024-620-2144, or pass by and speak to any of our friendly staff. Locate us at Maijon, close to Zoom Lion headquarters. Royal Dazzle Event Center, creating memories.
Welcome back. This is Ideas Exchange on TV XYZ, and this program is brought to you by the kind courtesy of X Natural Mineral Water and ZP. And my guest in the studio today, we are doing this outdoor at the premises of Africa Education Watch, is the Executive Director, Kofi Asare. We are looking at the education sector. Some say there is a crisis. Other key stakeholders say there's not too much cause for concern because there appears to be steps to address the concerns we have. Kofi, has there been enough consultation?
Well, in the specific case of the proposed 6-year duration of second cycle education, in a meeting with the Deputy Minister in November, he intimated that the ministry was considering some reforms to strengthen the quality of junior high school education, and that when they have finished doing their internal consultation, they will have stakeholder discussions on the proposals. And so for now it remains a proposal that we shouldn't discuss in public until we hear from them.
Now, it's good to hear this, but for me as a parent and as many watching this program, there's cause for worry because the Minister for Education has suggested that pilot programs are currently underway with some of the proposed new schools that they want to build to be run under the new system that they want to introduce. And just today, Wednesday, the President is cutting a sword for one of the STEM projects for Accra. Now, I want to walk us through some of what I have seen, things parents or anybody must know about the proposed education reforms for basic schools. And then you can help us understand what you have recommended in some of the issues you raised in the statement you issued. Now, the things you need to know, and I'll share on the screen as I read along, is kindergarten, primary, JHS, and SHS to be known as basic schools, while JHS 1, 2, 3, SHS 1 shall be referred now, if it is approved and becomes a policy, as BS 7, 8, 9, 10, and so SHS 1, for example, shall be referred to as BS 9. All students from JHS 1 to SHS 1 shall run a core program to be called CCP, comprising of 9 subjects. That's mathematics, languages, science, RME, which will stand alone as a subject, physical and health education, not examinable, career technology, social studies, computing, creative arts, and design. And listen to the key issues I'm going to raise in the next 4 pointers I've come across. And now it says, a new form of examination to be called the National Standardized Assessment Test shall be conducted for primary 2, 4, 6, and JHS 2. So it appears as if class 1, class 3, class 5, perhaps may not be writing any standardized test. Whether it is wholesale promotion or otherwise, maybe Africa Education Watch might help us to appreciate. BECE shall be replaced by exams at JHS 3 to enroll students into SHS. What does that mean? What does that mean? We'll look at it. And then after SHS 2, students shall select career-related programs, which includes TVET, that's vocational technical subjects, or high diploma programs such as science, business, and arts. And WASI shall be replaced by university entrance exams. And of course, after SHS 1, students shall write common core exams in SHS 2. Doesn't it sound complicated? And 2, if there is no buy-in, won't it be a waste of resources, and it may appear to turn around the academic calendar for public school?
All right. Appreciated. Let me end my submission I was making on the proposed change in the duration of second cycle education to 6 years. In the meeting with the deputy minister, he indicated that it was something the ministry was considering, but it was at a consideration stage. So at that point, we should wait for further, So, okay. So we were waiting for some engagement with the ministry, after that, but there hasn't been any such engagement until we heard it in the media that the ministry was actually considering increasing, quote unquote, secondary education to 6 years. It doesn't mean that they are making senior high school 6 years, but it means that they are upgrading the quality content at junior high school level to make it more of a junior secondary than a senior basic school, if you like. Let me put it that way. While we identify ourselves with any policy aimed at strengthening the quality of junior high schools, because junior high schools are a missing link in our educational system. That is the weakest link. We set up junior high schools without giving them laboratories and facilities. They are virtually three rooms, an extension of the primary school. But don't forget that junior high schools are supposed to be actually an extension of secondary schools, because they were junior secondary schools. They were not senior basic schools before they became junior high schools. They are supposed to be an extension, in fact, the beginning of the secondary school, and not an extension of the primary school. But they bear more, resemblance, or they bear more characteristics to primary schools than senior high schools, because they don't have any facilities beyond the 4 corners of the 3 rooms that we call junior high school 1, 2, and 3. So I align myself to any such efforts to upgrade the quality of junior high schools and make them more akin to senior high schools in terms of facilitating, in terms of resourcing them with necessary facilities, including science and technology, mathematics, education facilities, computer, facilities, etc. But let me say that we have not been consulted in any way on this. We don't know the level at which this particular proposal has reached. And that is why we, in our statement, called the ministry to undertake board consultations before agreeing on what to pilot in 2013, because it intends to pilot this junior high school reform or secondary school reform from 2013. 2013. Yeah, so all we are calling is that the ministry should consult widely and open up to other alternatives. People might have other proposals to strengthen junior high schools. Consider all before you can take a definitive position that this is what you want to pilot come 2013. The tendency in the education sector to mix consultation with information is very high. People meet people, inform them, and then they call it consultation. I am a student of civil society participation. And in my dissertation, I actually undertook research in civil society participation in governance. Information is the lowest form of participation. It is the lowest. Consensus is the highest form of participation. In between information and consensus, we have various levels of participation, including having dialogue. So what we see normally is information, where the politicians take decisions and inform you.
Is it something
that is not consultation? That is
that
information.
Appears to be the structure we have today, or it has always been with us?
That is the culture we've had at the Ministry of Education. Politicians come with their ideas. Anything you say, they won't listen. They want to do that. They have their own advisors. They want to do that. Okay, so they come and they inform you and they call it consultation. That is not consultation. Now, political authority, the Ministry of Education, they determine those they consult. It is not our fault and it is not our worry and it's not our objective to be consulted by the Ministry of Education in developing policies or in reforming. They have their own aspects. Ours is that we come in to demand accountability. We come in to ensure that your proposals align with what we feel are the real needs of the system. And that your proposals are not those that will deepen the already existing inequity in our educational system. That is why we have said in our release that we will, even though there is no solicited application, we will submit proposals in respect of how we think the junior high school system can be enhanced. For instance, we believe that any effort aimed at strengthening the quality of junior high school education should bring junior high schools closer to primary schools and should not take it physically away from primary schools unless it is modernized. Listen very well. The challenge we have is that junior high schools are not resourced. And how many do we have? About 10,000 junior high schools. You are not able to provide science laboratories, computer laboratories, etc. for them, so they are not resourced. If you want to resolve this issue, in resolving it, don't take the junior high schools physically away from the primary schools, because you'll be creating a distance problem. The highest factor in school dropout is distance.
Where has been the departure? Because if you look at the concept behind the changing of the educational structure to JHS, technical, vocational, and science education was key. But the implementation has been a sharp departure. And so what is the guarantee that if we decide to go for a new system of education, we can get what we want?
The departure, for me, there was no departure. From the time junior high schools were introduced, there was no departure. Nothing was done. A departure means something was being done and then we jettisoned it.
But at least there were demonstration schools.
You see, the concept was that you are building a junior high school to feed senior high schools. The junior high school should bear more characteristics of a senior high school than a primary school. As I said, the junior high schools, per their conceptualization, were not meant to be advanced primary schools. They were supposed to be pre-secondary schools. So junior secondary schools and not senior primary schools. But the facilities that we provided in them made them more of senior primary schools, or if you like, advanced primary schools, than junior secondary schools, because they had every characteristic of a primary school. They had nothing. Primary schools only have their 4 corners of their 6 rooms, and that's it. So we didn't resource them with the science and technology and technical and vocational education facilities that was required to make them proper junior secondary schools. So they became senior primary schools. So there was no departure. We didn't even do it. Okay, but I am saying that in resolving this challenge, let's bear in mind that if we adapt approaches that seeks to do a cohort approach by building junior high schools in every 10, 15 communities, and expecting that 10 to 15 schools after completing primary school will now come to junior high school in this school, which is a standard junior high school with state-of-the-art facilities, as an approach to resolving the issue of the lack of facilities in junior high schools, we will create further problems, because the #1 cause of school dropout in Ghana is distance covered before teenage pregnancy. The first is distance covered. Distance covered leads to more than 30% of school dropouts. So if a child has to walk more miles from their primary 6 to junior high school 1, the tendency of their dropping out is high.
But that appears to be the focus of government today. And let me read to you why I am saying so. For example, we have community day secondary schools, some of which may have been abandoned, but government claims they are still part of its target to be completed. We have a lot of senior secondary schools which lack basic infrastructure, dining rooms or dormitories or extra classrooms to accommodate the students we have today. But government has also said authoritatively that in the 2022 budget, allocations have been made for what they describe as STEM Academy, one of which has been commissioned by the president today, Wednesday, in Accra. And they are going to do 35 of such science, technology, engineering, mathematics, STEM senior high schools across the country. And then it will include 5 STEM universities. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this onto the table for us to consider is this penchant for governments to leave projects and heavy investments by previous regime because you don't have that collective buy-in. From historical antecedents and what government is looking at today and the backlog of problems we have in the sector, as a key stakeholder, do you think we are on the right path, or there's enough room for us to look back and consider some of the challenges that have drawn us back?
I think in education policy development, continuity is key. How we progress or gravitate towards achieving educational objectives in the education strategic plan and sustainable development goals for by 2030 depends to a large extent on how we develop policies, seek buy-in from all stakeholders, such that even if there are political transitions, the policies are not truncated because there's a measurable or substantial level of acceptance by a stakeholder community. And it is such deficits that led to the abandonment of the e-blocks. Because when the then government was building the e-blocks, there were deficits in consultation. I raised serious issues in 2012 about the way and manner some of the e-blocks were sited. They were situated in the middle of forests. And I kept questioning myself, who is going to attend those schools? There was one in the Mankrasu area there, in the BA. It was located in the forest. So we kept raising the issues that, look, if you're going to locate or situate schools here, they have to be boarding schools. But again, limited consultation. There was limited political buy-in, not buy-in, but buy-in by stakeholders, including the other political parties.
The MPP then in opposition.
Let's face it, that in this country, there are always 2 political parties, one in government and one in waiting. That is the fact. So building consensus means that ensuring that these 2, at least have some level of appreciation. Forget about the plan. There will be a plan, but the strategy in executing the plan can always change. There was limited consultation and acceptance. That is why that government comes and then does not continue all the projects. Continue those that it thinks are necessary and fits into it.
And it doesn't own it as a national project.
Yes.
Now, I'm cutting you short, but I will stay with this issue. How then can we depart from this culture that appears to be wasting our state
That is where I'm
resources?
coming. That's where I'm coming to. We are having a repeat of the same thing today, where the other political parties agitated because after abandoning some of my projects, you are also starting new ones, which I also do not subscribe to. I do not buy into the idea of you approaching a centralized approach to STEM and rather, instead of you ensuring that every junior high school has STEM facilities, you want to create specialized STEM centers. And then if you like, bring gifted students from selected schools to come and subscribe to these schools and then go through the system to the university, while the other students are left there. Does that address the resource imbalance between rural and urban schools? does that address the STEM deficiencies equitably, or it creates a segregative system where you are using positive discrimination to provide preferential treatment to some gifted students to come to certain locations and enjoy what you were unable to provide for all. Now, so if the other party does not buy into this agenda, then the likelihood of that party not coming into power and not continuing is high. That is where the citizenry suffer. That is why we keep raising issues of consultation and not information.
Okay, so it's a good point. We'll stay here and delve into other areas that certainly must be brought on board. When we talk about stakeholders of education, who are they?
The stakeholders are the religious bodies, because they own majority of the schools. And then the political parties, because, as I said, we have only 2 political parties in government. In Ghana, one is always in power and the other is always in waiting. Then we have the civil society community. We have an interest in education because we are investing in education, and then we are also investing in education governance. Parents are stakeholders, and then academia, teacher unions. So these are all
now,
stakeholders.
The reason why I deliberately asked this question,
but the key stakeholder is the political
parties. Teacher unions of Ghana today, you are looking at religious education units. You are also looking at even traditional authorities to a larger extent, because they superintend on communities and how much they benefit from infrastructure if government have to extend them to those areas. Now, if all these systems appear to be either ignorant or quiet or pretentious or not openly speaking truth to power by demanding what must be done right, are we not looking on while we waste state resources and continue to cry about getting the right things for our educational sector? If you want to be very frank,
as a CSO, we don't determine how other CSOs should run their activities. We don't determine their strategies. We don't determine.
But teacher unions are not CSOs.
No, they're also CSOs.
Traditional authorities cannot be CSOs.
They are all CSOs, but we don't determine their strategies. Okay. But I made a profound statement at the Golden Tulip Hotel 3 weeks ago when we were having a budget convening with Star Ghana. And the leaders of the Christian community were there. The donor partners were there. When issues relating to spending efficiency were being raised, I told them directly. There was a question from one of the development partners that how can we assist in ensuring that we have a more spending efficient system. Then I told the lady that you donors can assist us when you begin to speak in support of us, when we, the CSOs, i.e. the think tanks or NGOs, are calling for spending efficiency, calling for transparency, calling for accountability, calling for proper consultations. But when you are quiet, and only Africa Education will be making noise about spending 35 million on past questions, spending 65 million on calculators, then people will ask themselves, are these guys not making too much noise? Are they the only ones seeing this? So one way you can support us is by you moving from a traditional, approach of being diplomatic and quiet, and begin to speak about accountability issues, because you are investing money as a donor in the system. Then I came to the Christian communities, and there were Christian leaders there. Then I told them that in 2008, when I was working very, very, very closely with the Christian Council, Reverend Dr. Fred Degbe was the chairman. The Christian Council was chairing the Millennium Development Goals campaign. They were very vibrant in advocacy, development advocacy. They were at the forefront. They would be the first people to call a press conference, mobilize CSOs, and demand a release of capitation grant if capitation grant was delaying. I'm telling you this. In 2007, 2008. Today, the churches are only praying. So that day at Golden Tulip Hotel, I mentioned to the religious bodies that we want to see a more vibrant faith-based community interested in not just praying for our schools, praying for our teachers, praying for our leaders, but supporting CSOs like EduWatch, to demand accountability in the governance of education resources, especially to demand for spending efficiency, value for money, transparency in managing our resources. Because the majority of the challenges we are identifying always exist because we don't manage the money we have very well.
Now, our topic for today is...
So I will always say that, yes, indeed, CSOs need to be more proactive, not just NGOs or think tanks, but faith-based organizations, development partners, and other traditional and non-traditional CSOs, including our traditional authorities, should be more concerned about governance issues when it comes to education.
Now, so the question or the topic was education sector crisis, self-inflicted or political mess. How would you respond to this?
I don't think the education sector is in crisis. I think the education sector is going through challenges. And I think that these challenges, some of them are avoidable challenges.
Are you not being diplomatic?
If you know me, you will know very well that diplomacy is not in my diction. The sector is facing challenges related to, i.e., poor planning in the rollout of a very, very beautiful curriculum. Poor planning. Rushing to roll out a curriculum before elections. What was the fear about? Okay, so politically expedient planning when it comes to implementing a beautiful curriculum has now made the beautiful curriculum very, very bad to the extent that 2 years and counting, primary schools do not have textbooks to teach in that new curriculum. So what benefit has accrued from that beautiful content in the new curriculum? Poor planning in the rollout of a junior high school curriculum to the extent that we have taught for 2 years in the primary school curriculum. So assuming you were in classes, we taught you in classes in the new curriculum, and you moved to junior high school one to be taught in the old curriculum. Poor planning. You understand? So we have, and ever since, the problem in the education sector, as I keep saying, has been the policy praxis is simply having something different going on in schools than the policy. The policy looks beautiful. When it comes to implementation, the planning, everything is normally not as good as the policy. That is the same problem we are facing. So I think that we've not been able to confront the age-old issue of poor planning in the education sector, including the rollout of the education reforms. The education reforms, look, we have teacher training now upgraded to tertiary. The minimum qualification of teachers is now B.Ed. Fantastic, ensuring that we have a more competent, more qualified, and more experienced teaching force. Second, we have a curriculum reviewed after about 15 years. It should be happening every 5 years, 15 years, and then we have a standard-based curriculum, a curriculum where progressing through from KG1 to junior high school 3 is based on the attainment of certain key standards and using the outcomes to inform further teaching and learning, including the national standard test that was introduced. You mentioned the test.
No. See, the national standard test, for example, we don't have much time, just about 10 minutes to wrap up, but you would see in there that there used to be a system which saw wholesale promotion. And then around some part of the reviews that was going on, schools decided that students who don't do well will be repeated. And then the crisis arose. I'm using crisis a lot because I may be seeing it differently from maybe my understanding, because I may not be as experienced as you in the sector. But what we saw was that teachers or school heads were complaining about other students who had to be rolled onto the next classes, but had students who had been repeated, and therefore there were issues about space. Now, if you look at the new proposal, the national standardized test that is coming up, you'd realize that they are going to be examined at class 2, class 4, class 6, JHS 1, even JHS 2, and then you go to SHS 1, they will do it, and then SHS 2 is when they are going to plan to select a core subject to plan for entry to the university, and only then they will just write a university entrance exam.
Let me explain
now, quality of education, standardized tests, and the possibility of fallout and where we place them. How do we manage this complication?
One of the challenges we are having with the reform is about communication. Communication on the reform has not been succinct enough, I must admit. Perhaps due to the planning deficiencies, things keep changing. So a lot of the things you are saying were true, but are no more true. because they have changed. And that is a bit worrying to us, because it looks as if we are in the middle of a reform. We are reforming. Now we are reforming the education reform. Because it is no more true that the Common Core program will be run from junior high school 1 to senior high school 1. It has changed. That's why I'm saying that the planning deficits has created a situation where there's a communication gap between what citizens know to be what the reforms are about and what they really are, because things have changed after they were originally communicated.
Is government talking too much, or government is excluding the public too much?
Government is not talking, because by now citizens should know that the Common Core is no more 4 years. It's now 3 years. By now, I'm saying by now because schools are reopening next week or so. In January, junior high school teachers are going to be taught in the new curriculum from 14th or so. By now, parents should know that the Common Core is no more 4 years. It's 3 years, and that is going to last junior high school 1 to junior high school 3, and no more senior high school. By now, parents should know that there's nothing like WASI being replaced with a university entry examination. A lot of things have changed since the new administration took over. But again, I am worried because that transition hasn't been smooth, because too many things seem to be changing between the previous administration and then this current administration, even though within the same government and within the same reform. So people are asking questions. Are we reforming in the midst of a reform? So again, let me come to the national standard test. The intention of NST is not to replace terminal examination, no. So it doesn't replace replacement, or it doesn't repeal replacement. The national standard test doesn't repeal repetitions. There can be repetitions, and there will be repetitions if teachers decide so on the basis of children's performance. What the national standard test does is that it actually affords an opportunity to diagnose students' attainment of literacy and numeracy,
special skills.
Yes, numeracy accomplishment, so that based on the level of achievement they are able to record through the examination, corrective, administrative, and policy level measures will be deployed in the schools to try and then upgrade them, so that their literacy and numeracy levels are consistent with grade level targets. Okay. So the NST is not your terminal exams. Terminal exams are still there, but the NST will be there for the purpose of informing the continuous implementation of the standard-based curriculum, so that inherent deficits in literacy and numeracy will be identified and resolved at the school level as the child progresses through from primary 1 up to junior high school 3.
It sounds so nice on paper.
It is very beautiful. It's a very beautiful concept, because it is one of the few, it is one of the most important approaches I have seen, where there is a formative assessment process laced with the curriculum, such that as we travel the curriculum implementation, we are gauging our progress. How are children in Miracle Chrome becoming more literate and numerate? Why are they not performing as better as the students? What are the challenges in that particular school? So this is school level diagnosis.
Irrespective of lack of infrastructure in that Brekum preparatory or primary school compared to, let's say, Achimota primary school.
The curriculum does not intend to solve all the problems in the education sector.
Okay.
It intends to solve the problems of content, providing relevant content that is important for today. But most importantly, the sad aspect is that after this beautiful NST, which is part of the curriculum package, the implementation last year of the first NST in primary 4 was absolutely disastrous. Absolutely disaster. Look at what happened last year. As we speak, some students have still not written the NST. Some students in Bia West were writing the NST. They were writing it around 6:37 p.m. In the Nkranza area, it wasn't even written at all. In many of the schools we monitored, papers got to the schools around 5. Absolute disaster. Let me say that and even private schools were not part of it. Meanwhile, looking at the National Pre-Tertiary Assessment Framework, which is the context within which the NST was written, private schools are supposed to be part of it, because government needs to gauge the attainment levels, in literacy and numeracy across board, not just for public school students. Why were private schools omitted at the last hour? All these things are questions we need to ask. If we don't ask these questions, the next NST cannot be better. And not just ask these questions, but hold people accountable for using the taxpayers' money to administer that NST we saw last year. It was an apology of an exercise that we should never encourage in this.
Now we have 2 minutes to wrap up. Now, Dr. Clementa Park, he used to work actively with civil society, is now a known politician, a member of parliament, deputy ranking member on the Education Committee of Parliament. And I'll share this on the screen as I read along. It says, we don't know exactly when public schools are reopening. He has raised concern about that. You have addressed that. He talks about 44,000 teachers for 284,000 basic schools who are not available. And he's talking about 15%, the highest in 20 years. He's talking about capitation grant, which is not been released as it should be in tranches, that is not being actively helping the teachers. And he talks about no textbooks for public schools in 2 years and so on. Now, these may fall under some concerns that have been raised generally. Now, as we wrap up, Africa Education Watch, if you are speaking to parents in the area of hope, what would you advise?
They should be a bit more, measured in their expectation, because reform requires a lot of ad hoc decisions until things normalize. Again, I will remind us that we are still navigating our education system through COVID. Indeed, Uganda only reopened school yesterday. After almost 2 years, they couldn't go to school last year. So it's not every country in Africa that was able to even open the education system within COVID. So we are in the midst of a pandemic and a reform, and so things may not be as smooth as they ought to be. However, they have an obligation to demand accountability from government when it comes to the delivery of basic education, whether it is free or not. There are taxes that make education free, and by being free does not preclude them or does not deny them of the opportunity or the right to demand accountability when things do not go right.
That be done? We have the PTA Association, we have parents who may show interest. For example, in your presentation, as you wrap up in 2 minutes, you make reference to the GET Fund issues. We know the GET Fund has been collateralized. Government is raising money for infrastructure projects, for example. If that is not being done, how can me, poor parent, or under any umbrella, hold government accountable after 4 years?
The concept of civil society is not built on the existence of NGOs and think tanks. It is built on the existence of the culture of civic participation and involvement in our governance. We are only mobilizers. We only mobilize opinions. But parents should see themselves as part of the collective, as individuals having a role to play in demanding accountability, as people concerned that the lack of their participation in the civic space will reduce quality of service delivery in the democratic dispensation. Bear in mind that parents will hit the streets and protest against increasing transport fares. The last time I saw parents hit the streets in Sunyani or so, protest against increase in transport fares and other
bad roads and so
bad roads in their community. I told a colleague of mine then, a parliamentarian, that have you seen parents protesting in Sunyani? I say yes. I am looking forward to the day when parents will hit the streets and demand textbooks for their children. 2 years after the rollout of a new curriculum and schools operating without textbooks, parents are not interested in fighting for the education of their children. They are rather interested in enjoying it free and keeping quiet because it's free. We don't complain. So we need a lot of enlightenment within the citizenry, especially within the class that enjoys free public services, especially the lower class. If we strengthen their involvement in governance of education, even at the school level, you will see PTAs organizing press conferences and making a case that 2 years of delay in the release of capitation grant is killing the management of our schools. But if PTAs, and don't forget, there are parents. If parents at the community level, at the school level, are not ready to speak out, then CSOs cannot do all the work for them. And so we need parents to be much more interested, concerned, and speak against things when they go wrong. And of course, when things go right, just like CSOs do, appreciate that from government. But on the issue of the GET fund, we have indicated that the GET fund is the biggest fund in the education sector. And so capping it at 25% means that you are denying the education sector of significant investments, especially at the basic level. In 2020, in the whole year, we built only about 100 primary schools in the whole year. 260 districts. It means that we couldn't even build one primary school per district. If we continue to progress along that line, it means that many poor people will not be able to have access to primary education because there are no schools in the area. So we have mentioned it to the finance minister that the GET fund should be uncapped so that the inflows into the fund should be allocated rather than capping it at 25% and allocating just 1.4 billion to the sector.
As we wrap up on this interesting conversation, it appears it is becoming more heated, and Kofi is now becoming more like an advocate, raising the critical issues that we should be interested in. But I am, of course, interested in the latter part of his presentation, that as a parent, as an association, you must realize that your active involvement in the churning out of policies and the formulations and the reviews, rather than being passive, would be more of a useful tool to the collective good of all Ghanaians. Kofi Asare is the Executive Director of Africa Education Watch. I told you he has over 17 years of experience in the industry, working across platforms from sectorial ministries to local and international organizations, offering support in terms of consultancy and also helping in the formulation of policies or reviews that are near to the benefit of majority of people wherever he has been, either working for Ghana or other countries. In 2016, he was awarded the prestigious 2016 Millennium Excellence Award for Rural and Urban Development by the Millennium Excellence Foundation under the distinguished patronage of His Royal Majesty Otumfuo Osei Tutu II, the King of the Ashanti Kingdom. He's been our guest, full of knowledge, appreciation, passion for the improvement of our educational sector. That's how we end the program tonight on Ideas Exchange. And I believe that you've taken a lot of ideas that, walking into the future, we shall all put our hands on deck to improve on what we have or Kofi sees as a challenge. Kofi, thank you very much for granting us this opportunity.
Pleasure having me.
Thank you.